Why are Jews and Arabs always at war? Why is there constant conflict, even among Muslim countries? The surprising key to understanding this conflict lies in two biblical figures, Isaac and Ishmael. These two brothers were sons of Abraham. Isaac became the patriarch of the Jewish people, and Ishmael became the patriarch of the Arabs and Muslims. Thousands of years ago, the two brothers had a conflict incredibly similar to the one we see today between Israel and the Muslim world. Yet, the Bible doesn't just explain the origin of this conflict, it also reveals how it will end. We'll uncover the only biblical scene where these two brothers reconcile, a scene that, according to scholars, perfectly predicts how this modern-day conflict will finally conclude. Do you know how this story ends according to the Bible? There's an ancient Jewish principle called Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, meaning the deeds of the fathers are prophetic signs for their children. In simpler terms, the lives of these patriarchs are not merely historical events, they prophetically foreshadow the future of their descendants. Interestingly, Christianity speaks of a similar idea known as typology, used by the Apostle Paul to reveal future events through the stories of the Old Testament. Scholars have applied these two methods to understand Israel's conflict with Muslim nations, and the results are astonishing. Here's why this matters. Isaac and his mother Sarah symbolize the people of Israel, whereas according to Muslim tradition, Ishmael and his mother Hagar represent the Muslim people. When viewed through this lens, everything fits perfectly into place. The conflict begins with a promise from God. Abraham receives a blessing for his descendants. I will make you into a great nation, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Yet there was a problem. His wife Sarai was barren. She couldn't have children. In those times, a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear children, making her infertility an enduring source of shame. Later on, God would change her name to Sarah, which means princess. But to Sarah, that name felt like a cruel joke. How could she be a princess when she couldn't even give Abraham an heir? Time passed, and as they grew older and older, God's promise of a child seemed increasingly impossible. Eventually, Sarah was overcome with despair. It was Sarah herself who proposed a solution to Abraham, one rooted in the customs of their time. "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave instead." She gave him her servant, Hagar, so Abraham could have a child with her. It was an act of desperation, but this solution soon caused new trouble. Sarah, feeling inferior, began treating Hagar cruelly. Pregnant and humiliated, Hagar did the only thing she could do. She ran away into the desert. Alone in the vast emptiness, her future seemed hopeless. Yet, at the darkest moment, it was not death that found her, but a divine encounter. An angel of the Lord appeared by a spring in the wilderness and spoke directly to her. First, he gave her a command and a blessing. "Go back to your mistress and submit to her. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." Then she named her son. He will be called Ishmael, meaning God hears, because the Lord has heard your suffering. And here, Genesis introduces a prophecy that explains our current times, describing Ishmael's character in a way that would forever mark his descendants. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Let this sink in for a second. This ancient phrase describes word for word today's headlines. It may sound offensive, but let's not forget that Ishmael was blessed by God. What does being a wild donkey mean? It's not an insult. In the ancient world, the wild donkey was the ultimate symbol of untamable freedom, a fiercely independent spirit, submitting to no one and roaming freely. This prophecy described a people destined to survive against all odds, but also to live in an almost constant state of conflict. Hagar returned and gave birth to her son, whom Abraham named Ishmael. This child would become the patriarch of the Arab people from whom Islam would later emerge. At last, after so many years of waiting, Abraham held in his arms the proof that God's promise was real. Imagine the patriarch's relief and joy. For 13 long years, Ishmael was his only son, his firstborn, the center of his world, and the heir to all his plans. In this child, Abraham saw the future of a mighty nation. The prophecy described Ishmael as a wild donkey, a fiercely independent spirit difficult to tame. Today, many see this trait in the pride and resilience of Arab nations. Yet the prophecy had two sides. It also warned that his hand would be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. Tragically, this prediction of endless conflict resonates on two painfully evident fronts today. The prophecy wasn't limited to external enemies. The history of the Islamic world has been marked by deep internal divisions, notably between the Sunni and Shia branches. Modern wars like those in Syria or Yemen are tragic examples of this struggle between brothers, echoing the warning that Ishmael's hostility would be directed against everyone, including his own. But the prophecy clarifies, even more precisely, the roots of conflict with Israel when Isaac is born. Years had passed. Sarah was now 90 and had lost all hope in God's promise. She had resigned herself to her legacy continuing through Ishmael. She felt God had abandoned her. But suddenly one day 3 mysterious visitors appeared at Abraham's tent. As 99-year-old Abraham offered them hospitality, one of them gave him incredible news. "I will surely return to you, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Sarah heard the conversation from inside the tent and laughed. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but of bitter disbelief. She no longer dared to hope. Abraham's reaction was also surprising. When God confirmed that the covenant would come through this new son, his first thought was for Ishmael. Instead of celebrating, he pleaded with God anxiously, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing." This was the reaction of a heartbroken father who loved his first son and feared the conflict that was coming. Despite everything, God kept his word. Sarah gave birth to a son, and Abraham named him Isaac, which in Hebrew means, "he will laugh." This name would forever remember the laughter of disbelief from his parents. For a time, there was joy in the camp, but tension was growing. The conflict erupted during Isaac's weaning celebration. Sarah saw Ishmael mocking his little brother. Here we find an important linguistic detail. The Hebrew word used for mocking shares the same root as the name Isaac. Ishmael wasn't just playing, he was challenging Isaac's place as heir, as if saying, "I am the firstborn, the true heir." For Sarah, this was the last straw. Her reaction was swift as she demanded Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The Bible says this deeply troubled Abraham because of his love for his son. His heart was broken. God told him to listen to Sarah, but also promised to make Ishmael into a great nation. Though it pained him, Abraham obeyed. The next morning, he gave bread and water to Hagar and Ishmael and sent them into the desert. That farewell marked the physical separation that confirmed the beginning of a spiritual divide. A father had to choose between his children. Abraham's anguish in casting out his son Ishmael reflects the historical wounds both peoples carry today. For many Muslim countries and Palestinians, Israel's creation in 1948 and the displacement of their people was a catastrophe. They refer to it as Nakba. This catastrophe is the modern version of Hagar and Ishmael's expulsion into the wilderness. God himself had promised Abraham to bless Ishmael after hearing the patriarch's devotion to him. Suddenly, a baby is born, and overnight, his future vanishes. Isaac's birth didn't mean sharing the inheritance. It meant losing everything. This isn't about simple jealousy. For Ishmael, Isaac's existence meant the erasure of his own identity. We see the parallel today. Israel's existence is interpreted as an erasure of the Muslim identity in surrounding countries. Sarah's demand, "That son cannot inherit alongside mine," echoes in today's most radical speeches, for instance, when Iranian leaders call for Israel's destruction. A text cited in Iran's statutes includes a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, which calls for violence. This saying, called a hadith, claims that the final hour will not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews and the Muslims would kill them. until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree would say, "Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." But this hadith, referenced in the charter of the Palestinian political authority known as Hamas, continues in an even more revealing way. The text adds that all rocks and trees will betray the Jews, with the exception of the boxthorn tree. Tradition associates the boxthorn with a Jewish tree. A few years ago, an imam in Palestine cited this same hadith during an event. He claimed that Jews know about this prophecy and, for this very reason, are planting thousands of boxthorn trees in their settlements to have places to hide when the time comes. Despite the painful separation between Isaac, representing Israel, and Ishmael, representing the Arab peoples, God had a plan for both, but the plans were different. To understand why Ishmael's blessing differs from Isaac's, one must first understand the most important aspect of this story, the covenant with God. And most importantly, only Isaac received the covenant. A covenant is more profound than just a promise. It is a binding commitment, a sacred and special relationship between God and a chosen people. Through this covenant, God promised Abraham a unique relationship, and through Abraham, blessings that would flow to all his descendants. But why Isaac and not Ishmael the firstborn? The answer is a divine choice that we cannot understand. And God is very explicit about this. "Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." Later, he reaffirms it. "Because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." This decision establishes a central idea in the Bible. Divine election is not based on human merit or order. Ishmael was born from Sarah and Abraham's human plan and effort. Isaac, however, was born from a miracle, from God's direct intervention in two elderly and barren bodies. The spiritual covenant is tied to the miracle, not the human plan. Ishmael receives a blessing of worldly greatness. Isaac receives the covenant to be part of God's sacred history. The concept of being the covenant people and the chosen people has been the core of Jewish identity throughout history. It has been a source of pride. It has been the source of their survival, and at the same time, a cause of conflict with a world that often rejects this idea. But God makes it clear that, although Ishmael isn't the son of the covenant, he's not beyond his care. Before the expulsion, when Abraham pleads for his firstborn son, God responds directly with a promise of greatness. "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him and make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly." This promise is dramatically fulfilled in the desert after Hagar and Ishmael are cast out from Abraham's camp. When Hagar and young Ishmael are about to die of thirst, an angel of God intervenes. Not only does he show them a well of water to save their lives, but he repeats the blessing. "Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy. I will make him into a great nation." Ishmael's blessing is one of earthly greatness. While Isaac is promised a spiritual covenant, Ishmael is promised power, descendants, and territory. He becomes father to 12 princes, paralleling Jacob's 12 sons, who would form the 12 tribes of Israel. Some see the fulfillment of this promise in the rise and expansion of the Arab peoples. Arabs throughout the centuries have developed great empires, a rich culture, and enormous global influence. But surprisingly, the Quran and Torah have different versions of Abraham's life. The struggle between Abraham's sons continued after their separation in the sacred texts. The fight for inheritance became a battle over who told God's true story. Islam firmly states that previous sacred texts, like the Jewish Torah, were altered by people over time. This is why the Quran presents itself as God's final and correct message. In the Bible, Abraham's greatest test of faith comes when God asks him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. It's a pivotal moment that seals the covenant. But in Islam, the story changes completely. Islamic tradition says that the son Abraham was going to sacrifice wasn't Isaac, but Ishmael. What's the reason for this change? Why is it so important? Because being the son of the sacrifice makes you the most significant spiritual heir. By placing Ishmael in this role, Islam makes him the protagonist of the greatest act of faith. This shifts the spiritual inheritance through his lineage, from which the Prophet Muhammad descends. It's not a small change. It's a way of claiming that the true covenant inheritance belongs to them. A curious detail is that the Quran doesn't name the son of the sacrifice, but Islamic scholars identified him as Ishmael. This creates a major difference. Judaism and Christianity continue the story through Isaac. In contrast, Islam sees itself as a correction of that narrative and considers Abraham and Ishmael the founders of its most sacred place, Mecca. This battle to determine which story is the true one has had real and violent consequences. The fight over sacred sites in Jerusalem is the perfect example. The most sacred place for Jews, the Temple Mount, is the exact same location where two of Islam's most important mosques stand today. It's like seeing one history physically built on top of another. Controlling this site becomes a symbol of which religion is right. A fascinating detail that makes this even more intense is what lies directly beneath the Dome of the Rock, Jerusalem's Golden Mosque. There sits a stone known as the Foundation Stone. In Jewish tradition, this isn't just any rock. They believe it's the spiritual center of the world, the place where Adam was created, where Abraham prepared to sacrifice Isaac, and where the most sacred part of Solomon's temple once stood. In Islamic tradition, this very same rock is the spot from which the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during his night journey. It's the same physical place, the same rock, but with two contradictory stories. It's not one story on top of another, it's two sacred texts colliding at a single point. Another fascinating detail is the famous Western Wall. Many believe it's a wall from the ancient Jewish temple, but it's actually the last remaining retaining wall of the Temple Mount complex. For Jews, it's the closest place they can approach to pray at their ancient holy site, a symbol of both mourning and hope. For Muslims, this same wall is known as the Burak Wall, where Muhammad tethered his winged steed before ascending to heaven. This is why control of Jerusalem is so fiercely contested. They're not just fighting over territory, but for control of history itself. It's one more chapter in the long and painful struggle to determine which story, Isaac's or Ishmael's, has the final right to claim the most sacred place on earth. But the prophetic interpretation of the conflict's end isn't bitter. On the contrary, though it may seem impossible, reconciliation exists. After all the history of conflict, the Bible shows a surprising scene that offers hope. When Abraham dies, the text says something crucial, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. After decades apart without speaking, Isaac and Ishmael reunite to bury their father. In that moment, they are just two sons in mourning. A key detail, according to Jewish tradition, is the order of the names, Isaac and Ishmael. That Ishmael, the elder, allowed Isaac, the heir, to be named first, is seen as a great gesture of acceptance and reconciliation. This act is viewed as a sign for the children, a prophecy that peace is possible. Jewish tradition interprets this as a sign that in the future, Ishmael's descendants may reconcile with those of Isaac. The burial demonstrates that, despite everything, God did not abandon Ishmael, and both remain Abraham's sons. This hope is based on God blessing both brothers. Though the spiritual covenant was with Isaac, the promise to make Ishmael a great nation was never withdrawn. In current times, although we remain far from resolving the conflict, some events have been interpreted as the beginning of mutual understanding between Jews and Muslims. Amid news of wars and tensions with Iran, something that seemed unthinkable occurred, a direct echo of that burial, where Isaac and Ishmael stood united. In recent years, several Arab nations, including the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, decided to do something different. They signed peace agreements and normalized relations with Israel. The most curious and revealing aspect is the name they chose for these treaties, the Abraham Accords. For the first time in decades, modern diplomacy didn't focus on conflict, but deliberately invoked the common father of Jews and Muslims. It was a public acknowledgement that despite theological and political differences, the origin is the same. Another little-known example of reconciliation is that the deepest and most mystical branches of both faiths, Jewish Kabbalists and Muslim Sufis, often found understanding and an almost identical language. Their goal wasn't to prove that their religion was the correct one, but rather that they shared the same aim, dissolving the ego to unite with the divine. Having the same purpose, they spoke a very similar spiritual language. Both systems describe the soul's journey in similar ways. Both Kabbalah and Sufism see life as a soul's journey, ascending through different spiritual levels or worlds to draw closer to God. Both describe God as an infinite and incomprehensible light, and humans as a spark of that divine light yearning to return to its source. The language of love is central to both traditions. They speak of a burning love for God that transcends all other feelings, a love that seeks total union. The common principle is clear. When the search becomes personal and spiritual, labels like Jewish or Muslim begin to lose importance compared to the experience of the sacred. In a way, both mystics accomplished what politicians often cannot. They met at Abraham's tomb, acknowledging that both were seeking the same and only God of their common ancestor. If they have so much in common, how could they have had so many conflicts throughout history? Because, as we said before, the echo of the father's actions reverberates in the actions of their children. We have seen two paths in this story, that of endless conflict and that of difficult human reconciliation. But the Bible presents a third way, a solution that doesn't depend on politics or men, but on divine intervention, the coming of Jesus. The Christian faith presents Jesus not as a simple prophet, but as the definitive solution to the problem of human division. How does Jesus solve the conflict? The central idea is that Jesus doesn't take sides in the fight between Isaac and Ishmael. Instead, he creates a new family, where those old identities are no longer the main source of division. The Apostle Paul writes that Christ is our peace, who has made both one, breaking down the dividing wall of hostility. This wall of separation represents historical and religious hostility. According to Christianity, when united with Christ, a person receives a new identity that transcends their earthly identity. They are no longer primarily Jewish or Arab, descendants of Isaac or Ishmael, but part of a new spiritual family. When does this reconciliation occur? This is a crucial question. According to this view, reconciliation has two stages. The first happens in current times. Peace and unity begin now in the hearts of people who accept this path. It manifests in communities of believers from Arab and Jewish backgrounds who, despite the political conflict surrounding them, already live as brothers in faith, demonstrating that overcoming division is possible. However, the complete and final solution to the conflict on a global level is seen as a future event. The Bible teaches that this will be fully accomplished with the return of Jesus, known as the Second Coming. At that time, he will establish a definitive and lasting peace on earth. How will Jesus do this? The Bible explains that this peace is achieved by creating a new humanity. The Apostle Paul, in a passage reflecting the idea of tearing down walls of hostility mentioned in the sources, explains that Christ came to abolish enmity, to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace. This hope connects with ancient messianic prophecies that appear in the Old Testament and speak of a future time when the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and they will not harm or destroy on all my holy mountain. But this isn't the only prophecy that speaks of Christ as the one who resolves the conflict between Jews and Muslims. The prophecy of the Prince of Peace, also from Isaiah, is key to understanding the solution that Christianity proposes. This title means that Jesus' primary mission wasn't to be an earthly king who would win wars, but rather to bring inner and spiritual peace. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall rest upon his shoulders, and he shall be called these names: Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and peace will extend without end. To break the cycle of hatred that began with Ishmael and Isaac, Jesus introduces a principle that is a true spiritual revolution, an idea that goes against all Jewish and Muslim logic. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Which path will Abraham's children choose? The desert of hostility or unity at their father's tomb? Leave your opinion in the comments. If these passages interested you, get ready, because what you've just seen is only the beginning. Islam also narrates the life of Jesus, but differently than Christianity, and the differences are shocking. Click on the video on screen to